Hi, this is Peter Schiff. This is April 2nd, 2009. Well, the markets are getting a boost today, I guess, from statements, as I said, coming out of the G20 that were generally positive in nature. Generally, these politicians, they get together, their joint press conferences, and all they're really talking about is they're saying things that the people want to hear, and they're trying to put a smiley face on everything, and the markets are rallying, the dollar is declining, and people think that the crisis is behind us because the Group of Seven has agreed to do something about the problem. Of course, this is all show. What's happening, the current economic downturn, is not a problem that can be solved. The downturn is the solution. The problem was the phony economy in America that preceded the downturn. I think behind the scenes, a lot was said that we're not hearing about. And I'm pretty convinced that the Chinese are not going to cooperate with the United States. They're not going to provide the funding, and they're going to use their money for themselves, and that we're going to see a lot more money printing and a lot more inflation, and these problems are going to get worse. But also, what is helping the markets today is a new ruling that is going to be relaxing the requirements for banks to mark some of these toxic assets to market. And we're getting a big rally on the back of that because now banks can pretend that their assets are worth more than they really are, and they can inflate their earnings, as if we can just all wish the problems away and make it so. Again, this is our attempts to sweep these problems under the rug. And let me explain the problems with mark-to-market. What the government is saying is that you can use something other than price to determine the value of your securities. One thing they're talking about is using cash flow analysis. But the cash flow analysis is wrong because it assumes that current cash flows are going to continue. But I think that's a very faulty assumption to make, and that's why the market values of many of these stocks, I mean not of stocks, but of these loans, these assets, is low, because the market knows that the cash flow is not going to continue just because it's there today. Just because somebody is current on his mortgage now doesn't mean they're going to be current for the next 30 years. That's what marking to market allows you to do, is allow for the possibility of default, even though the mortgage is current now. And I think, obviously, if somebody has a $500,000 mortgage on a $300,000 condo, just because they're making their payments today doesn't mean they're always going to make them, especially if they might become unemployed or if they have an adjustable rate mortgage that might reset to a much higher level. But a perfect example of the fallacy of this market is with the house that my mother's been renting. Her landlord stopped making the mortgage payments about 8 months ago. Even though she's collecting rent from my mother, she's keeping all the rent and not paying any money to the bank. She's not paying her first mortgage, she's not paying her second mortgage. Now, 8 months ago, she was paying both mortgages. So, using the current standard, the bank could have marked those assets at face value, both the holder of the second mortgage and the first mortgage, because obviously she was current. Now, why did my mother's landlord decide to stop making her mortgage payments? She had no change in her financial circumstances. The only thing that happened is she realized that it made no sense to pay on, I think her two mortgages together were about $800,000, and her house was maybe worth $500,000. So she decided that it made no financial sense to make payments on $800,000 of mortgages on a $500,000 property, so she simply stopped paying. Now the property is in foreclosure or going into foreclosure. It's probably going to take a whole year. Meanwhile, she continues to collect rent from my mother. The second mortgage is going to get completely wiped out. Obviously, they're going to get nothing. And maybe the first mortgage will agree to reduce the mortgage to my mother's landlord. And so maybe instead of having, I forget, maybe the first mortgage was $500,000, maybe it'll end up being $300,000 or $350,000 or $400,000, or maybe they'll foreclose. But the bottom line is the asset, even though it was performing 8 months ago, obviously was not worth face value because it went into default. And there are a lot of mortgages out there right now that are current, that 6 months from now, a year from now, are not going to be current. And it's obvious that that's the case. And mortgages need to be marked down to reflect for the very real possibility that default is going to happen. and that losses are going to be there. But to just allow banks to pretend that a mortgage is worth its full face value simply because it's current now, it is simply going to lead to greater insolvency, because it's going to keep insolvent institutions in business longer, allow them to attract additional deposits, allow them to make additional loans, so that when they ultimately go bankrupt, the losses are even greater. But again, all the government is able to accomplish with this change is to dilute everybody, is to pretend that assets are worth more than they are. And that's how we got into this mess. Remember, when the first Bear Stearns hedge funds went bankrupt, they had been marking their assets to myth, marking them to model. They weren't marking them to market. It's when they got redemptions and they were first forced to sell their assets that they found out how little they were really worth, and that's when the whole crisis began. So the solution is not to adopt those policies. We need to deal with the reality of the situation, not pretend it doesn't exist. I've said many times that blaming mark-to-market for the problems is like blaming your fever on a thermometer. We're sick for a reason. The problem with these bad assets is not that they're illiquid, it's that they lack value. And we need to come to grips with how little they're actually worth. Anyway, that's it for today. Potentially I'll be back again tomorrow with another block. Thank you.